Have you ever seen a movie from the 2000s and thought to yourself, wow, times sure have changed? Well, these are 10 of those movies that you wouldn't see made nowadays. There is so much in Tropic Thunder that wouldn't be okay today. The movie is sort of a parody of the movie industry, making fun of the way that they'd cast white actors to play people of color. So they cast Robert Downey Jr. and put him in blackface, while giving him lines that sounded a bit stereotypical.
What do you mean, you people?
And we haven't even gotten to Ben Stiller, whose character had previously played a mentally challenged boy named Simple Jack. There's even a scene where Robert warns Ben never to go full R-word because it would hurt his chances of winning an Oscar. When asked if a movie like Tropic Thunder could be made nowadays, Robert said,
"Oh, you could do it."
But even he'd admit,
it was impossible to not have it be an offensive nightmare of a movie.
At least Tropic Thunder was somewhat self-aware, unlike our next entry on this list. Gigli may have set Bennifer on track to be married 20 years later, but that doesn't mean it wasn't any good. The plot centers around the two of them kidnapping a mentally challenged man played by an abled actor, and Ben isn't entirely kind to him.
Eat your food, stupid!
But it gets worse. Jennifer's character is introduced as a lesbian who switches teams because she just hasn't seen a man like Ben before, and that isn't even to mention just how poorly written the movie is.
It's turkey time.
Huh?
Gobble, gobble.
The movie apparently even got Ben in trouble with his daughter years later.
There are things where, like, my daughter will be like, this is ableist and disgusting, and okay.
Even at the time, Gigli bombed so bad that it, obliterated Ben's acting career for a while, forcing him to move into directing. And may we take just a moment to direct you to that subscribe button before we move on to a movie that's filled with the sort of roles Tropic Thunder was making fun of. White chicks could have been an opportunity to get back at Hollywood for movies like Tropic Thunder. Instead, this movie, about two African-American cops forced to go undercover as white heiresses, quickly dissolves into some pretty uncomfortable humor. The main characters are constantly using their disguises to spy on unsuspecting women. Plus, the movie tends to lean on some pretty exaggerated stereotypes about women.
I'm Cellulite Sally. Look at my huge badonkey.
And of course, we've got that good old gay panic humor here too.
They're guys, aren't they?
Wow, you really are disgusting.
The idea could have worked if the movie was actually funny, but unfortunately, there's just too many times where they go for the easy joke. It wasn't even well received in 2004. White Chicks was nominated for 5 Razzies, including a Worst Actress nomination for the Wayans brothers in their disguises. Well, they ended up losing to Halle Berry for that one. More on that later. But first, let's keep talking representation. It's never easy to get all the facts straight in a real person's life, but The Blind Side didn't even seem to try. This Academy Award-winning movie started gaining criticism when someone pointed out that the plot seemed white saviory, and among those critics was the person the movie was actually based on, former NFL player Michael Orr. He felt that the movie portrayed him as dumb, and especially took offense to the way that it showed him as someone who had to be taught the game of football while watching the movie, or thought, no, that's not me at all. I've been studying, really studying the game since I was a kid. Nowadays, we imagine that there would have been more care taken to get those sorts of details right on The Blind Side.
I was 11, 12 years old, getting up on my own, going to school. When somebody else get that credit, yeah, it pisses you off.
But as our next entry proves, the movie industry wasn't all too sensitive in the 2000s. So this entry tries to leave us with an uplifting message, which is at least better than our next entry does. Shallow Hal is about learning to see past physical appearances so you can appreciate someone for who they are. But that message becomes a little harder to see when it's hiding behind one never-ending fat joke. Jack Black plays a man who's been hypnotized to see everyone for their inner beauty, meaning that he thinks Gwyneth Paltrow's character is supermodel thin when she's actually obese. She breaks chairs when she sits down, sinks her side of the canoe, and does all sorts of unrealistic things that are meant for a cheap laugh. Gwyneth Paltrow even had to wear a fat suit for some of her scenes, something that she's since gone on to regret. When she asked her best friend to guess what her least favorite performance was, he immediately went with Shallow Hal, and she didn't at all disagree.
Exactly.
She's even gone so far as to call the whole movie a disaster. Speaking of stereotypes, Van Wilder is a doozy. Like, Kal Penn plays an Indian stereotype whose name is...
I'm Taj Mahal.
badalan babado.
This cringe was so real that Kal even hung up his agent after she told him the character's name, but she called him back explaining she couldn't get me in the door for auditions that weren't written brown. And the only brown parts that were written to be fairly stereotypical. Kal hoped that by taking these roles, he'd be opening himself up to better options in the future. An approach that, seemed to have worked, considering his career nowadays. If Kal was offended by this role, imagine what he would have thought about our next entry. Add onto that list the fact that much of Van Wilder focuses on Ryan Reynolds' character inappropriately hitting on Tara Reid when she's just trying to do her job as a journalist.
It's a date.
It's an interview, not a date.
And there's just no way this movie could have been made today. We aren't necessarily loving this guru nowadays. The Love Guru stars Mike Myers as a Hindu guru, and so much of the movie is just one long joke making fun of the culture. Whether it be Ben Kingsley in brownface playing guru, Tuggan Maipura, elephant, love scenes, or the phony Hindu greetings. There is little about this movie's cultural representation that would sit well with audiences today. Even in 2008, there were people in Myers' home country of Canada demanding that the movie shouldn't be released there without receiving some serious edits first. And one Hindu leader from Nevada described it as lampooning Hinduism and Hindus. And besides that, the movie is filled with gross out humor that was clearly made to be shocking, but it just sort of makes it a slog to sit through. And speaking of movies that are basically just one long, insensitive joke, nowadays, we have romantic comedies about actual gay relationships, like Love, Simon. But in the 2000s, we had to make do with I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry. As a result of some unconvincing legal red tape, two straight men are forced to marry one another, and the rest of the movie is spent making awkward gay panic jokes.
Kiss the husband.
Yeah, we heard you.
Like with Shallow Hal, the movie tries to come around by giving us an uplifting message in the end, but the concept isn't the movie's only problem. There's also every scene where Rob Schneider appears, playing a Japanese wedding officiant who's just so cringe.
You will need to have a witness. We cannot supply one for $100.
$100 hairs?
Pretty much every moment he's on screen is a joke at the community's expense, and the movie was bad enough to earn 8 Razzie nominations. And there's no doubt that superhero movies are made different nowadays. Even the worst of them try to stick a little closer to their source material than this movie did. Catwoman is about a shy woman who's given cat-like powers after being revived by an Egyptian deity. And what does that have to do with the cat burglar from the comics? And why does she act like an actual cat now?
Catnip.
That isn't even to mention the way that the movie over-focuses on Halle Berry's body in the most revealing catsuit ever. The conflict's pretty low stakes for a superhero movie too, pitting Catwoman against a makeup company selling face cream that rots your skin if you stop using it. Yeah, it's a pretty bad movie, proving why superhero movies are just made differently now. But oddly enough, it wasn't the only movie from the 2000s about a shy person who gets a serious attitude makeover. What do you think happens to you if you're just too nice? Well, according to me, myself, and Irene, you develop a split personality. The movie's treatment of mental disorders was just so cringe that even at the time of its release, the National Alliance on Mental Illness wrote a letter to 20th Century Fox arguing that the movie pushed forward the myth that schizophrenia was a split personality. Jim Carrey was even asked to give a public service announcement discussing the difference between schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, but he never did. And to make matters worse, Jim Carrey's other personality in the film has a tendency to say some pretty offensive things. Just look at the scene where he mocks a woman for buying feminine hygiene products. But which of these movies from the 2000s were you shocked to see that got made at all? And were there any more examples that you didn't see on the list? We'd love to hear what you think, so don't forget to make yourself heard down below.